Speak Smarter, How to Speak Better Than 99% of People. Published by Profound Audiobook. Introduction. A person can change the way others see them simply by changing the way they speak. Words shape first impressions, influence opportunities, build trust, create attraction, establish leadership, and determine how seriously people take you. Long before people judge your talent, intelligence, or experience, they judge your communication. A calm voice creates confidence. Clear words create authority. Thoughtful conversation creates respect. And powerful communication can quietly open doors that force alone never could. Speaking smarter is not about sounding complicated or trying to impress people with big vocabulary. Truly intelligent communication sounds simple, controlled, confident, and intentional. It is the ability to express ideas clearly, stay calm under pressure, listen carefully, speak with purpose, and make people feel understood. Some people naturally command attention when they speak, while others struggle to hold a conversation for even a few minutes. The difference is rarely intelligence. The difference is communication habits. In this audiobook, we will break down the hidden psychology behind powerful communication and show you how to speak with greater confidence, clarity, influence, and emotional control. You will learn how to think before speaking, remove weak language from your conversations, control your tone, become a better listener, handle difficult conversations calmly, tell memorable stories, and speak in a way that earns genuine respect. More importantly, you will learn how communication reflects your mindset, discipline, and emotional maturity. Every conversation is shaping your future, whether you realize it or not. The way you speak affects your relationships, career, opportunities, confidence, and reputation. Strong communicators are not born with a special gift. They develop habits that make their words more powerful over time. And once you learn those habits, you begin to carry yourself differently. People listen differently. Opportunities appear differently. And slowly your entire life begins to change through the power of better communication. Chapter 1. Pause before you speak. A few seconds can completely change the direction of a conversation. The difference between sounding intelligent and sounding careless is often nothing more than a pause. Smart communicators understand something that emotional people never learn. The first thing that enters your mind is not always the best thing to say. Yet many people speak the moment they feel something. They react before thinking, answer before understanding, and interrupt before listening. Over time, this creates unnecessary conflict, weakens credibility, and damages respect without them even realizing it. When you learn to pause before you speak, you begin taking control of your communication instead of letting your emotions control it for you. That pause may only last 2 or 3 seconds, but inside those seconds, your mind has time to organize itself. You stop reacting emotionally and start responding intentionally. Calm people are rarely the loudest people in the room, but they are often the ones others trust the most. Their words carry weight because they do not throw them around carelessly. Think about how many conversations are ruined because someone speaks too quickly. A person gets criticized and instantly becomes defensive. Someone hears an opinion they dislike and interrupts before the other person finishes. Another person becomes nervous and starts rambling without direction. Fast reactions create weak communication because they come from emotion, not clarity. Intelligent communication requires composure. And composure begins with slowing down your mouth long enough for your mind to catch up. Tyler Bennett, a 33-year-old operations supervisor in Detroit, learned this lesson the hard way. He managed a warehouse team that constantly faced delays, mistakes, and pressure from upper management. Whenever problems happened, Tyler reacted immediately. If an employee made an error, he would criticize them on the spot. During meetings, he interrupted people before hearing the full explanation because he assumed he already understood the issue. He believed fast responses made him look decisive and strong. In reality, his employees saw him as impatient and emotionally unpredictable. Conversations around him became tense because nobody knew how he would react. One afternoon, a shipment problem caused a major delay for an important client. Tyler immediately blamed one of his employees in front of the team. Frustrated and angry, he spoke without asking questions first. Minutes later, he discovered the mistake had actually come from another department entirely. The room became silent. Nobody challenged him directly, but something changed after that moment. People stopped speaking openly around him. Employees became cautious during meetings because they feared his reactions more than the actual problems. That experience forced Tyler to examine the way he communicated. Instead of responding instantly, he began practicing a simple habit. Before answering difficult questions or reacting to stressful situations, he paused for a few seconds. At first, it felt unnatural. He worried the silence would make him look uncertain. But the opposite happened. His responses became calmer, more thoughtful, and more accurate. Employees started listening more carefully because his words carried greater control. The atmosphere around him slowly changed. People felt safer speaking honestly because they no longer expected emotional reactions every time something went wrong. That is the hidden power of pausing before you speak. It does not only change your words, it changes the emotional energy you bring into every conversation. A pause signals confidence. Nervous people rush. Emotional people explode. Insecure people overtalk. But calm people think first. They understand that silence is not weakness. Silence is control. You do not need to become slow or robotic in conversations. This is not about overthinking every sentence. It is about creating enough mental space to choose your words instead of releasing every emotion immediately. Even a short pause can help you avoid saying things you later regret. It allows you to notice your tone, organize your thoughts, and speak more clearly. The people who communicate best are rarely the people with the fastest responses. They are the people with the strongest self-control. They understand that words are powerful, and powerful things should be handled carefully. The moment you stop reacting automatically, your communication begins to mature, and when your communication matures, people begin seeing you differently. Calmness creates trust. Thoughtfulness creates respect, and often the smartest thing you can say is nothing at all until you are ready to say it well. Chapter 2. Cut the noise from your words. Clear communication is one of the rarest skills in the world. People often assume that sounding intelligent means using bigger words, longer explanations, or more complicated language. But truly smart communicators do the opposite. They simplify. They remove confusion. They express ideas in a way that feels natural and easy to understand. The goal of communication is not to impress people with how much you know. The goal is to make people understand you clearly. Think about the people you enjoy listening to the most. They probably are not the ones using complicated vocabulary every few seconds. They are usually the people who explain things simply, speak directly, and make complex ideas feel easy. Clear communication creates comfort. Confusing communication creates distance. And in many situations, people trust clarity more than intelligence they cannot understand. A major mistake people make is trying too hard to sound smart. The moment someone becomes focused on sounding impressive, their communication usually becomes unnatural. They begin over-explaining. They use unnecessary words. They stretch simple ideas into long conversations. They fill silence because they think talking more creates value. But often, the more words a person uses, the weaker their message becomes. Powerful communication is not about adding more. It is about removing what is unnecessary. You can see this everywhere in daily life. Someone asks a simple question, and instead of giving a direct answer, the other person begins circling around the point with endless details. Another person uses technical language that confuses everyone in the room. Someone else repeats the same idea 5 different ways because they fear not being understood. In all these situations, communication loses strength because clarity disappears. When people become mentally exhausted trying to follow your words, they stop listening emotionally long before the conversation ends. Vanessa Cole, a financial advisor in Charlotte, struggled with this problem for years. She was highly educated and understood financial planning extremely well, but her client meetings often felt awkward and disconnected. During consultations, she filled conversations with industry terms, technical explanations, and long descriptions because she believed it made her sound professional. Clients nodded politely during meetings, but many left feeling overwhelmed instead of confident. Some avoided follow-up appointments altogether because they secretly felt embarrassed, asking her to explain things again. One afternoon, a retired couple came to Vanessa for help organizing their savings and retirement plans. She spent nearly an hour explaining investment strategies, using complicated financial language she had learned throughout her career. When the meeting ended, the couple thanked her politely and left. A few days later, they chose another advisor. Vanessa later discovered the reason. The couple did not doubt her knowledge. They simply felt more comfortable with someone who explained things clearly. That realization changed the way Vanessa communicated. Instead of trying to sound impressive, she focused on making clients feel calm, informed, and confident. She stopped using complicated terminology unless absolutely necessary. She shortened her explanations. She learned to pause and ask, "Does that make sense?" rather than continuing endlessly. Slowly, her communication transformed. Clients became more engaged during meetings. Referrals increased. People trusted her more because they understood her more. This is something many people fail to understand. Clear communication is not a sign of lower intelligence. It is often a sign of mastery. Anyone can make simple things sound complicated. But making complicated things sound simple requires true understanding. When you fully understand something, you can explain it clearly. Confused communication often reveals confused thinking. Another important part of cutting noise from your words is learning how to stop overloading conversations with unnecessary information. Not every thought needs to be spoken. Not every detail improves a story. Strong communicators understand the value of restraint. They give enough information to make the point clearly, then they stop. This keeps conversations focused, engaging, and memorable. People also underestimate how exhausting verbal clutter can become. Long-winded communication forces listeners to work harder than necessary. Eventually, attention disappears. Even valuable ideas lose power when buried beneath too many words. Simplicity keeps attention alive. Simplicity creates emotional connection. Simplicity allows your message to land with strength. This does not mean your conversations should become cold or robotic. Warmth and personality still matter deeply, but warmth becomes stronger when your communication is clear instead of scattered. Think of communication like cleaning a window. The cleaner the glass becomes, the easier people can see what you are truly trying to say. As you improve your communication, begin paying attention to how often you use unnecessary words. Notice when you over-explain simple points. Notice when nervousness causes you to ramble. Notice when you use complicated language to protect your ego instead of helping the listener understand. The goal is not perfection. The goal is clarity. The people who speak best are usually the people who think clearly enough to communicate simply. Their words feel calm, direct, and intentional. They do not hide behind complexity. They respect the listener's attention and value understanding more than performance. And once you learn how to cut the noise from your words, people stop struggling to follow you. They begin trusting you, remembering you, and listening much more carefully to what you have to say. Chapter 3. Lower your voice, increase your power. People remember energy before they remember words. You can say something intelligent, thoughtful, and completely reasonable. But if your tone sounds angry, insecure, rushed, or defensive, the message loses power immediately. Communication is not only about what comes out of your mouth. It is also about the emotional feeling your voice creates in other people. Your tone tells people whether you are calm or emotional, confident or nervous, controlled or reactive, and in many situations, people respond more strongly to your tone than to your actual words. This is why two people can say the exact same sentence and create completely different reactions. One person speaks calmly and earns respect. Another says the same thing with frustration or tension in their voice and immediately creates resistance. Tone changes everything. A loud voice can make simple feedback sound like an attack. A rushed voice can make good ideas sound uncertain. An irritated tone can damage a relationship faster than harsh words themselves. Strong communicators understand that power rarely sounds frantic. True confidence is usually quieter than insecurity. Calm people do not need to overpower conversations because they are already in control of themselves. Meanwhile, emotional people often raise their voice because internally they feel unheard, threatened, or unstable. The louder someone becomes, the more their emotional state begins controlling the conversation. This does not mean you should speak softly all the time or remove emotion from your voice completely. Passion matters, warmth matters, energy matters, but emotional control matters more. The goal is to develop a voice that sounds steady, intentional, and grounded even during stressful situations. When your tone remains calm under pressure, people naturally trust you more because calmness signals strength. Marcus Holloway, a youth football coach in Ohio, learned this lesson during one difficult season. Marcus cared deeply about his players and wanted them to succeed, but his communication style constantly created tension. During practices, he shouted instructions non-stop. When players made mistakes, frustration immediately appeared in his voice. Even simple corrections sounded harsh because of the emotional intensity behind them. He believed raising his voice showed leadership and discipline. Instead, many players became nervous around him. One afternoon during practice, Marcus noticed his team looked unusually hesitant and disconnected. Players avoided eye contact after mistakes. Nobody communicated confidently on the field anymore. After practice, one assistant coach quietly told him something that stayed in his mind for weeks. He said, "The players aren't only reacting to your words, they're reacting to your energy." Marcus realized he had been creating pressure instead of confidence. That conversation forced him to pay attention to how he sounded, rather than only focusing on what he said. He began lowering his voice during practice. Instead of reacting emotionally after mistakes, he paused and spoke more steadily. He became more deliberate with his words. At first it felt unnatural because he associated calmness with weakness, but over time the opposite happened. Players listened more carefully because they no longer felt constantly attacked. His instructions became clearer because emotion stopped overpowering the message. The team became more confident because his energy felt controlled instead of chaotic. This is one of the hidden truths about communication. Calm voices command attention because they create emotional stability. People feel safer listening to someone who sounds composed. They trust leaders who remain steady during stressful moments. Even in personal relationships, tone can completely change the emotional direction of a conversation. A calm discussion can solve problems. A tense tone can create problems that never existed before. You may not realize how often your tone changes when emotions take over. Stress speeds up your speech. Anxiety tightens your voice. Anger sharpens your tone. Nervousness raises your pitch. These subtle changes affect how people experience you emotionally. That is why emotional self-control is deeply connected to communication mastery. If you cannot control your emotions, eventually your emotions will control your voice. One simple habit can immediately improve your tone. Slow down. People often speak too quickly when nervous, emotional, or desperate to prove something. Slowing your pace naturally creates more control. It allows your words to land more clearly. It also gives your mind time to stay organized instead of reacting impulsively. Calm pacing creates calm communication. Another important habit is learning to separate intensity from authority. Many people believe being forceful makes them sound powerful, but constant intensity often weakens credibility because it signals emotional instability. Real authority does not need constant volume or aggression. It comes from certainty, calmness, and emotional discipline. Pay attention to the people whose communication naturally earns respect. They are usually not shouting, they are not rushing, they are not speaking emotionally every few seconds. Their voices sound grounded, their tone feels intentional. Even when they disagree, they remain composed. That emotional steadiness makes people trust their words more deeply. Your voice is carrying far more than information into the world. It is carrying your emotional state, your confidence level, your patience, your discipline, and your presence. And once you learn how to control your tone instead of letting emotions control it for you, your communication immediately begins sounding stronger, wiser, and more powerful without changing a single word. Chapter 4. Listen like a leader. People often believe communication is mostly about speaking well, but some of the strongest communicators in the world are not known for talking constantly. They are known for listening deeply. Listening is one of the rarest forms of respect you can give another person. In a world where everyone wants to be heard, interrupted conversations have become normal. People wait for their turn to speak instead of truly paying attention. They prepare responses while the other person is still talking. They jump into conversations with advice before understanding the full situation. Over time, this weakens relationships, creates misunderstandings, and quietly damages trust. Strong listeners operate differently. They give people space to finish their thoughts. They pay attention not only to words, but also to emotions, tone, pauses, and energy. They understand that communication is not simply about exchanging information. It is about making people feel understood. And when people feel understood, they naturally feel safer, more connected, and more willing to trust you. Many people underestimate how powerful listening really is, because listening feels passive. Talking appears powerful on the surface, but in reality, listening often creates far greater influence than speaking. People are naturally drawn toward those who make them feel heard. They remember conversations where they felt emotionally understood. Meanwhile, people who constantly interrupt, dominate discussions, or redirect every conversation toward themselves slowly become exhausting to be around. One reason listening is difficult is because the human mind loves control. When someone speaks, especially during emotional conversations, the mind immediately wants to react, fix, defend, explain, or respond. But true listening requires patience. It requires temporarily setting your own thoughts aside long enough to fully absorb another person's perspective. That takes emotional discipline. Jasmine Rivera, a hotel manager in Las Vegas, struggled with this for years. She was highly organized, hard-working, and extremely solution-oriented. Whenever employees came to her with problems, she immediately jumped into fixing mode. If someone explained a difficult situation, Jasmine interrupted halfway through with instructions and solutions before the person fully finished speaking. In her mind, she was being efficient. She believed quick answers showed leadership, but over time, her staff became emotionally distant from her. Employees stopped bringing concerns openly because conversations with Jasmine felt rushed and one-sided. Even when she solved problems correctly, people often left feeling unheard. During one stressful week at the hotel, a long-time employee finally spoke honestly to her. He said, "Sometimes it feels like you're listening just long enough to respond, not long enough to understand." That sentence stayed with Jasmine, because deep down, she knew it was true. After that conversation, she consciously changed her communication habits. During meetings, she stopped interrupting. She allowed silence instead of rushing to fill every pause. She focused fully on the person speaking, instead of mentally preparing solutions immediately. Something surprising happened. Employees became more open, more honest, and more cooperative. Problems that once felt emotionally charged became easier to solve because people felt respected before solutions were discussed. This reveals something important about listening. People do not only want answers, they want acknowledgement. Sometimes the emotional experience of being heard matters just as much as the actual solution itself. A person who feels ignored will often remain frustrated even after the problem is technically fixed. But when someone feels understood, emotional tension naturally decreases. Listening also makes you a far smarter communicator because it gives you information. People reveal their fears, motivations, frustrations, insecurities, and priorities through conversation constantly. But you cannot notice these things if you are always focused on your next response. Careful listeners pick up emotional details others completely miss. They notice hesitation in someone's voice. They recognize when a person says one thing but emotionally means something deeper. These observations make communication far more effective. Another powerful aspect of listening is that it slows conversations down emotionally. When people feel rushed, conversations become tense and reactive. But when someone listens patiently, the emotional atmosphere changes. Calm listening creates calm communication. It lowers defensiveness. It creates trust. And trust is one of the foundations of influence. One simple habit can immediately improve your listening skills. Stop interrupting people before they finish their thoughts. Even if you think you understand what they are about to say, let them complete it. Another important habit is learning to ask follow-up questions instead of immediately shifting the focus back to yourself. Questions show curiosity. Curiosity makes people feel valued. Eye contact also matters deeply during listening. People can feel when your attention is divided. Looking distracted while someone speaks sends the message that their words are not important. Strong listeners make people feel present and visible during conversations. You do not become a better communicator only by improving your speaking. You become a better communicator by improving your ability to understand people. And understanding begins with listening carefully. The people who command the deepest respect are often not the loudest voices in the room. They are the people who make others feel genuinely heard. When you learn to listen like a leader, conversations change, relationships deepen, trust grows stronger. People open up more honestly around you. And slowly, without forcing attention or dominating conversations, your presence becomes more powerful, simply because people feel understood when they speak to you. Chapter 5. Remove weak language from your speech. Words reveal confidence long before actions do. A person may have talent, intelligence, and good intentions, but if their speech constantly sounds uncertain, people naturally hesitate to trust them fully. Communication is deeply connected to perception. The way you phrase your thoughts affects how others see your confidence, competence, and authority. And one of the fastest ways people weaken their communication without realizing it is through weak language. Weak language usually appears in small phrases people barely notice. Words like maybe, I guess, kind of, probably, I'm not sure but, or this might sound stupid, quietly drain strength from communication. These phrases create hesitation before the real message even arrives. Instead of sounding clear and grounded, the speaker sounds unsure of themselves. Over time, this affects how seriously people listen to them. Many people use weak language out of nervousness or habit rather than lack of intelligence. They fear sounding arrogant, making mistakes, or being judged, so they soften everything they say. But constantly softening your words can slowly weaken your presence in conversations. There is a major difference between being respectful and sounding uncertain. Calm confidence does not require aggression, but it does require clarity. Imagine someone saying, I kind of think this plan could maybe work. Compare that to someone saying, I believe this plan can work. The second sentence sounds more confident, even though both people may feel equally uncertain internally. The words themselves change the emotional impression. Strong communicators understand that confident language creates stronger trust, stronger leadership, and stronger influence. Elliot Harper, a freelance photographer in Nashville, struggled with this constantly during client meetings. Elliot was talented and creative, but he had a habit of weakening every conversation with uncertain language. During consultations, he often said things like, I think I could probably do something like that, or maybe this idea might work. He believed he was sounding polite and flexible. In reality, clients interpreted his hesitation as lack of confidence. One day, Elliot lost an important contract to another photographer whose portfolio was less impressive than his own. Frustrated and confused, he later spoke with the client honestly. The client admitted something surprising. He said, You seemed talented, but the other photographer sounded more confident about what he could deliver. That moment forced Elliot to realize that people were not only evaluating his work, they were evaluating the certainty behind his words. After that experience, Elliot became more aware of his communication habits. He did not become arrogant or aggressive. Instead, he simply began speaking with greater clarity. He replaced phrases like "I'll try" with "I can do that." He stopped apologizing before sharing ideas. He removed unnecessary hesitation from his conversations. Slowly, clients responded differently. Meetings felt smoother. Negotiations became easier. People trusted his expertise more because his communication finally matched his actual ability. This is one of the hidden truths about communication. People often decide how much confidence to place in you based on how much confidence you seem to place in yourself. If your words constantly sound uncertain, people naturally become uncertain too. That does not mean you must pretend to know everything. Honest communication still matters deeply. Admitting when you do not know something can actually increase trust, but there is a difference between honesty and habitual self-doubt. Weak language also appears through unnecessary apologies. Some people apologize constantly, even when they have done nothing wrong. They say "sorry to bother you," "sorry if this is a dumb question," or "sorry for saying this." Over time, excessive apologizing quietly lowers confidence in conversations because it sends the message that your presence itself is a problem. Respectful communication does not require shrinking yourself. Another form of weak language is over-explaining decisions to gain approval. Insecure communication often comes from the fear of disagreement. People add endless explanations because they desperately want everyone to understand and approve of their choices. But confident communicators understand something important. Not every statement requires a long defense. Sometimes a clear sentence is enough. This does not mean you should speak with arrogance or act emotionally detached. Strong communication is not about dominating others. It is about removing unnecessary insecurity from your words. Calm certainty feels very different from ego. One creates trust, the other creates resistance. Begin paying attention to the small phrases you use every day. Notice how often you weaken your own statements before others even respond. Listen for words that reduce clarity and confidence. You may discover habits you never realized were shaping the way people perceive you. One simple change can transform your communication immediately. Say what you mean directly. Replace "I think maybe we should" with "I believe we should." Replace "this might sound weird" with simply saying the idea. Speak clearly instead of apologetically. Your words do not need to sound aggressive to sound strong. The way you speak teaches people how to treat you. Confident language creates confidence in others. Clear communication creates trust. And when your words stop fighting against your own authority, people naturally begin listening to you differently. They hear more certainty, more presence, and more self-respect in your voice. Over time, that changes not only conversations, but the opportunities and relationships your communication attracts into your life. Chapter 6. Stay calm when conversations get difficult. Anyone can communicate well when life feels comfortable. It is easy to sound patient, kind, and thoughtful when there is no pressure, disagreement, or emotional tension involved. But real communication skill reveals itself during difficult conversation. The moment criticism appears, emotions rise, or conflict enters the room, many people lose control of themselves without even noticing it. Their tone changes. Their words become sharper. They interrupt more. They stop listening. Instead of trying to understand the situation, they focus entirely on protecting their ego. And once emotions take over, communication usually begins falling apart. Difficult conversations are unavoidable in life. You will face criticism, disagreements, misunderstandings, disappointment, and uncomfortable truths. Relationships go through tension. Workplaces create pressure. Family conversations become emotional. People fail you. You fail others. The question is not whether difficult conversations will happen. The real question is whether you can remain emotionally steady when they do. Calm communication during stressful moments is one of the strongest forms of emotional discipline a person can develop. A calm person does not automatically become weak or passive. In fact, calmness often creates far greater control than emotional reactions ever could. Emotional people usually believe intensity gives them power, but the opposite is often true. The more reactive you become, the more control you lose over your words, your judgment, and the direction of the conversation itself. Think about how quickly conversations can escalate because neither person controls their emotions. One defensive comment leads to another. Voices rise, assumptions appear. People stop trying to solve the issue and start trying to win the argument. Hours later, both sides may barely remember the original problem because emotion completely took over the interaction. This happens every day in workplaces, friendships, marriages, and families. Nicole Turner, the owner of a busy bakery in Philadelphia, understood this pattern better than anyone. Running a growing business brought constant pressure. Employees made mistakes, customers complained, and unexpected problems appeared almost daily. Nicole worked hard and genuinely cared about her bakery, but stress slowly changed the way she communicated. Whenever a customer became difficult or an employee made an error, frustration immediately appeared in her voice. She interrupted people, defended herself quickly, and reacted emotionally before understanding the full situation. One afternoon, a long-time customer complained about an incorrect order during a crowded morning rush. Already stressed and exhausted, Nicole responded defensively almost immediately. Her tone became tense, and the conversation escalated in front of several employees and customers. Although the issue itself was minor, the emotional reaction made everything worse. Later that evening, Nicole realized something uncomfortable. The real problem had not been the customer's complaint. The real problem had been her inability to stay calm once pressure entered the conversation. That realization pushed her to change her communication habits completely. Instead of reacting immediately during stressful conversations, Nicole started giving herself small pauses before responding. She focused on lowering her tone instead of raising it. She stopped viewing every complaint as a personal attack. Most importantly, she learned how to separate emotion from communication. Over time, something surprising happened. Difficult conversations became easier to solve because she no longer added emotional fuel to them. This is one of the hidden powers of calm communication. Calmness slows emotional momentum. When one person remains emotionally steady, the entire conversation often becomes less aggressive. People naturally mirror emotional energy. Anger creates more anger. Defensiveness creates more defensiveness. But calmness often lowers emotional tension because it changes the atmosphere of the interaction itself. Remaining calm also helps you think clearly. Emotional reactions narrow your thinking. They make you focus only on protecting yourself, proving yourself right, or attacking the other person. Calmness creates mental space. It allows you to actually listen, process information, and choose words intentionally instead of impulsively. In difficult conversations, clarity matters far more than emotional intensity. Another important truth is that calm communication protects your dignity. Emotional reactions often create regret later. People say things they do not mean. They damage relationships over temporary emotions. They lose credibility because others no longer trust their emotional stability. But a calm communicator maintains self-respect even during disagreement. They know that losing control rarely improves the situation. This does not mean suppressing emotions completely or pretending nothing affects you. Emotions are human. The goal is not emotional emptiness. The goal is emotional discipline. You can still be direct, honest, and firm while remaining calm. In fact, calm honesty is often far more powerful than emotional aggression because people can actually hear the message instead of reacting to the tension. One practical habit that immediately improves difficult conversations is slowing your physical responses. Breathe more slowly. Lower your voice intentionally. Avoid interrupting. Even simple physical calmness helps prevent emotional escalation. Another important habit is refusing to take every disagreement personally. Not every complaint is an attack on your worth. Sometimes people are frustrated, stressed, confused, or emotional themselves. The strongest communicators are not people who avoid difficult conversations. They are people who can walk into difficult conversations without losing themselves emotionally. Calmness creates authority. Emotional control creates respect. And when you learn to remain steady while others become reactive, your words begin carrying a level of strength and maturity that very few people ever develop. Chapter 7. Ask questions that open people up. A conversation can completely change direction because of one good question. The right question creates connection, trust, curiosity, honesty, and emotional openness. The wrong question can shut people down instantly. Yet many people move through conversations without ever learning how powerful questions really are. They focus so heavily on what they should say next that they forget communication is also about guiding conversations in meaningful ways. Strong communicators understand something important. People naturally enjoy talking to those who make them feel interesting, understood, and emotionally comfortable. And one of the fastest ways to create that feeling is through thoughtful questions. Questions invite people into the conversation. They make others feel seen instead of judged. They create emotional space where real communication can happen. Many people mistakenly believe influence comes mostly from talking well. But some of the most charismatic and memorable people are actually excellent at asking questions. They know how to keep conversations flowing naturally because they show genuine curiosity about other people. Instead of constantly trying to impress others with their own stories, they create conversations that allow people to express themselves comfortably. This becomes especially important because people can immediately feel the difference between fake interest and genuine curiosity. Empty questions asked only to appear polite rarely create meaningful connection, but thoughtful questions create emotional depth because they show that you are actually paying attention. People open up more when they feel emotionally safe, and curiosity helps create that safety. One major reason conversations become awkward or shallow is because people ask predictable questions without listening deeply enough to continue naturally. They ask, "How's work?" then immediately shift the focus back to themselves after a short answer. Strong communicators listen carefully to responses and ask follow-up questions that show real engagement. This creates conversations that feel alive instead of mechanical. Caleb Dawson, a real estate broker in Tampa, struggled with this early in his career. Caleb was energetic, ambitious, and highly knowledgeable about the housing market, but his conversations with clients often felt forced. During meetings, he talked constantly about properties, prices, and market trends. He believed his job was to provide as much information as possible. But despite his effort, many clients seemed emotionally disconnected during conversations. One afternoon, Caleb met with a couple searching for their first home. As usual, he launched into detailed explanations about neighborhoods, pricing, and financing options. Halfway through the meeting, he noticed the couple looked distracted and overwhelmed. Instead of continuing, he paused and asked a simple question: "What kind of life are you hoping this home will give you?" The entire atmosphere changed instantly. For the next several minutes, the couple spoke openly about wanting stability, family dinners, a safe neighborhood, and a place where future children could grow up comfortably. Caleb realized something important in that moment. The conversation was no longer about houses. It was about people, emotions, and dreams. Once he understood that, his communication style changed completely. Instead of trying to dominate conversations with information, he focused more on understanding people through thoughtful questions. That shift transformed his career. Clients trusted him more because conversations felt personal rather than transactional. People opened up naturally because they felt heard. Caleb learned that asking the right questions often creates stronger influence than giving the perfect speech. Questions also help people feel emotionally valued. When someone asks thoughtful questions and listens carefully to the answers, it sends a powerful message: "You matter enough for me to pay attention." In contrast, conversations dominated by self-focus often leave others feeling invisible. People rarely remember every word you say, but they remember how conversations made them feel. Another hidden benefit of asking questions is that it reduces pressure during communication. Many people feel anxious in conversations because they believe they must constantly say something impressive or entertaining. But good communication is not performance. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is simply guide the conversation with curiosity. Questions create natural flow because they remove the burden of constantly trying to impress. The quality of your questions also affects the depth of your relationships. Surface-level questions usually create surface-level conversations, but thoughtful questions create emotional openness. Instead of asking only "what do you do?" strong communicators ask questions that reveal personality, perspective, and emotion. They ask things like, "What made you interested in that?" or "What's been the most challenging part of that experience?" These kinds of questions invite real conversation instead of automatic responses. Timing matters too. Asking too many questions too quickly can feel like interrogation rather than connection. The goal is natural curiosity, not forcing emotional depth. Strong communicators allow conversations to unfold comfortably. They pay attention to emotional cues and let trust build gradually. Another important habit is learning to ask open-ended questions instead of questions that can be answered with one word. Questions beginning with what, how, or why usually create fuller conversations because they encourage people to share more of themselves. People often assume communication mastery is about having all the right answers, but in reality, some of the best communicators are simply people who know how to ask better questions. They create conversations where others feel comfortable opening up, expressing themselves, and being understood. And when people feel emotionally safe around you, your presence naturally becomes more memorable, more trusted, and far more powerful than endless talking ever could be. Chapter 8. Stop explaining yourself so much. One of the clearest signs of insecure communication is constant over-explaining. People often believe talking more will make them sound smarter, more believable, or more understood, but the opposite usually happens. The longer someone keeps defending, clarifying, and justifying themselves unnecessarily, the weaker their words begin to sound. Strong communicators understand the power of brevity. They know how to say what matters clearly, then stop. They do not feel the need to endlessly convince everyone around them. Over-explaining usually comes from fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of disappointing people. Because of these fears, many people develop the habit of adding unnecessary details to every decision, opinion, or response. Instead of saying a simple no, they give a 5-minute explanation. Instead of expressing an opinion calmly, they immediately begin defending it before anyone even challenges them. Over time, this creates communication that sounds nervous rather than confident. Think about how often people explain things nobody even questioned. Someone arrives 5 minutes late and immediately launches into a long story about traffic, phone calls, and parking problems. Another person makes a small decision and feels the need to justify every detail behind it. Sometimes the explanation becomes bigger than the actual situation itself. This happens because many people unconsciously seek emotional permission from others. They want reassurance that they are accepted, understood, or approved of. But calm confidence sounds different. Confident communicators explain when necessary, but they do not constantly defend their existence, opinions, or choices. They understand that clarity does not require endless justification. A clear sentence delivered calmly often carries far more strength than a long emotional explanation. Madison Blake, a marketing assistant in Denver, struggled with this habit every day at work. She was hardworking, intelligent, and highly dependable, but during meetings she constantly over-explained herself. If she shared an idea, she immediately added long explanations to make sure nobody misunderstood her intentions. If she made a small mistake, she spent several minutes defending why it happened. Even simple decisions became exhausting conversations because she felt pressure to justify everything. At first, Madison believed her detailed explanations made her appear responsible and professional, but over time, something different started happening. Co-workers interrupted her more often. Meetings became mentally draining. Her ideas lost impact because she buried them beneath too many unnecessary words. One afternoon, after a presentation, a senior manager gave her advice that stayed with her for years. He said, "Your ideas are good, but you keep talking past the point where your message already landed." That sentence changed the way Madison viewed communication. She realized she was not speaking to communicate clearly anymore. She was speaking to manage anxiety. Instead of trusting her words, she kept adding more because silence made her uncomfortable. Once she understood that, she started practicing shorter responses. She shared her ideas more directly and resisted the urge to immediately defend every detail. Slowly, people began listening to her differently. Her words carried more weight because they sounded intentional instead of emotionally crowded. This reveals something important about communication. People often trust concise communication more because it sounds grounded. Endless explaining can unintentionally signal insecurity because it creates the impression that you are trying too hard to gain approval. Calm people do not rush to defend themselves constantly. They trust that clear communication is enough. Silence also plays a major role here. Many people over-explain because silence feels emotionally uncomfortable. The moment a pause appears in conversation, they panic and start filling the space with extra words. But silence is not always a problem. Sometimes silence actually strengthens communication because it allows your words to settle naturally. Powerful communicators are comfortable with pauses because they are not desperate to control every reaction in the room. Another reason over-explaining weakens communication is because it often shifts attention away from the core message. When people add too many details, listeners become mentally overwhelmed. The original point loses clarity. Strong communication depends on knowing what matters most and focusing attention there instead of scattering it everywhere. This does not mean you should become cold, distant, or emotionally closed off. Healthy communication still requires honesty, openness, and explanation when situations truly need it. But there is a difference between healthy clarity and anxious over-explaining. One comes from confidence, the other comes from fear. A simple way to improve this habit is to pause after making a point instead of immediately adding more. Say what you mean clearly, then allow space. Often, your first sentence is already enough. Another useful habit is learning to separate explanation from emotional approval. You do not need everyone to fully agree with every decision you make. Mature communication includes accepting that sometimes clarity is enough, even if not everyone approves. Pay attention to the moments when you feel pressure to keep talking. Those moments often reveal insecurity more than necessity. Notice how frequently anxiety pushes you to explain things nobody asked you to explain. Awareness alone can begin changing the habit. The people who communicate with the most quiet authority are usually not the people talking endlessly. They are the people who understand precision. Their words feel calm because they are not trying to force acceptance. They say what matters, trust their message, and allow silence to exist without fear. And once you learn to stop over-explaining yourself, your communication immediately begins sounding stronger, clearer, and far more confident. Chapter 9. Sound confident before you feel confident. Confidence is not always something you feel first. Often it is something you practice before it becomes natural. Many people wait to feel completely confident before they speak up, share ideas, lead conversations, or express themselves openly, but that moment rarely arrives on its own. Confidence grows through action, repetition, and communication habits. The people who appear naturally confident are not always fearless. Many of them simply learned how to communicate with steadiness, even while feeling nervous internally. One of the biggest misunderstandings about confident communication is the belief that nervousness means weakness. Nervousness is human. Even experienced speakers, leaders, performers, and professionals still feel pressure in important moments. The difference is that strong communicators do not allow nervousness to control their behavior completely. They have trained themselves to sound calm, even when emotions are active underneath the surface. Think about how nervousness changes communication. The voice speeds up, words become rushed, sentences lose clarity, people start using filler phrases like you know, or like every few seconds. Eye contact disappears. The mind becomes so focused on fear that it stops focusing on the message itself. Instead of communicating naturally, the person begins monitoring themselves constantly, worrying about judgment, mistakes or rejection. This internal pressure creates a cycle. The more someone fears sounding nervous, the more nervous they become. Eventually, many people begin avoiding communication opportunities altogether. They avoid presentations, difficult conversations, leadership roles, introductions, and moments where attention might focus on them. Over time, avoidance slowly weakens confidence even further, because the mind never gets evidence that it can survive those situations successfully. Connor Hayes, a junior architect in Seattle, understood this struggle deeply. Connor was talented and creative, but speaking during company meetings terrified him. Whenever he needed to present ideas, his body immediately reacted with anxiety. His hands became tense, his voice sped up, and his thoughts scattered. During presentations, he often rushed through important points just to escape the discomfort as quickly as possible. Although his designs were excellent, people sometimes overlooked his ideas because his communication sounded uncertain. One day, Connor spent weeks preparing a proposal for an important project meeting, but when the moment arrived, nervousness completely took over again. He spoke too quickly, skipped key details, and lost his train of thought halfway through the presentation. Later that evening, frustrated and embarrassed, he realized something important. His problem was not lack of knowledge. His problem was that fear controlled his delivery. Instead of waiting to magically become fearless, Connor began focusing on communication habits he could control physically. He practiced slowing his breathing before speaking. He prepared more carefully instead of relying on improvisation. During conversations, he consciously lowered his speaking pace. He also stopped trying to appear perfect. Rather than fighting nervousness aggressively, he accepted that some discomfort would always exist. Slowly, things began changing. His voice became steadier because he no longer rushed through every sentence. He maintained eye contact longer because he stopped obsessing over how others perceived him. Most importantly, he discovered something powerful. People often perceived him as far more confident than he actually felt internally. This reveals an important truth about confidence. Confidence is often communicated physically before it becomes emotional. Your posture, breathing, pacing, tone, and eye contact all shape how others experience your presence. When these habits become calmer and more controlled, you naturally begin sounding more confident, even while nervousness still exists underneath. One of the fastest ways to sound more confident is to slow down your speech. Nervous people rush because anxiety creates urgency inside the body. But slowing your pace immediately creates more control. It gives your mind time to organize thoughts clearly. It also signals calmness to the listener. A steady pace sounds more confident than fast, frantic speech. Breathing also matters more than many people realize. Anxiety creates shallow breathing, which increases tension in the voice and body. Deep, controlled breathing helps regulate emotional pressure and stabilizes your delivery. Before important conversations or presentations, even a few slow breaths can dramatically change how you sound. Preparation is another powerful source of confidence. People often fear speaking because they rely entirely on spontaneous thinking under pressure. Preparation creates familiarity, and familiarity reduces fear. This does not mean memorizing robotic scripts. It means becoming comfortable enough with your ideas that your mind does not panic when attention focuses on you. Another important habit is learning to stop chasing perfection. Many people become anxious because they believe every sentence must sound flawless. But confident communicators are not perfect communicators. They simply remain composed when imperfections happen. They continue speaking calmly, instead of collapsing emotionally over small mistakes. The truth is, confidence rarely appears all at once. It grows gradually through repeated experiences, where you prove to yourself that you can handle uncomfortable situations. Every conversation where you stay calmer than before builds evidence inside your mind. Every moment where you speak despite fear strengthens your communication little by little. The people who sound the most confident are not necessarily the people who never feel nervous. They are the people who learned how to carry themselves steadily despite nervousness. They understand that courage in communication is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to keep speaking clearly even while fear exists. And once you stop waiting to feel perfectly confident before expressing yourself, your communication begins developing a quiet strength that others naturally respect. Chapter 10. Tell stories people never forget. Facts may inform people, but stories move them. Long after people forget statistics, explanations, or technical details, they often remember a story that made them feel something. Stories create emotional connection because they allow people to experience ideas instead of simply hearing them. That is why storytelling has remained one of the most powerful communication tools throughout human history. Leaders use stories, teachers use stories, great speakers use stories. Even in everyday conversations, the people who communicate most effectively are often the ones who know how to turn simple moments into meaningful experiences. Many people struggle to hold attention because they communicate only through information. Their conversations sound dry, mechanical, or emotionally flat. They explain ideas logically, but they forget that human beings are emotional listeners. People connect more deeply to experiences than instructions. A story creates images in the mind. It creates tension, emotion, curiosity, and relatability. Instead of forcing people to understand an idea intellectually, storytelling allows them to feel it naturally. This does not mean every conversation needs dramatic speeches or elaborate storytelling performances. In fact, strong storytelling usually sounds simple and natural. The best stories often come from ordinary experiences told with clarity, emotion, and purpose. A good story is not about impressing people with details. It is about helping them connect emotionally to the message underneath. One reason storytelling works so powerfully is because it lowers resistance. People naturally resist lectures, criticism, and direct instruction, but stories bypass that resistance because they feel personal rather than forceful. A story invites the listener into an experience instead of pushing information at them. This creates deeper engagement because the listener begins drawing conclusions emotionally on their own. Brianna Foster, a wellness coach in San Diego, discovered this lesson unexpectedly. Brianna was highly knowledgeable about nutrition, exercise, and healthy habits, but during workshops, she often struggled to keep people engaged. She explained concepts clearly, shared useful advice, and presented detailed information, yet audiences seemed disconnected after a while. People listened politely, but very little of the message seemed to stay with them afterward. One evening during a small group session, Brianna decided to speak differently. Instead of immediately discussing healthy routines and nutrition plans, she shared a personal experience about a client who had spent years feeling trapped by exhaustion, stress, and unhealthy habits. She described the client's emotional frustration, the small changes they made over time, and the moment they finally began feeling confident and energetic again. Something changed instantly in the room. People leaned forward. They listened more closely. Afterward, several attendees approached Brianna and repeated details from the story almost word for word. That experience transformed the way she communicated. Brianna realized people were not only looking for information, they were looking for emotional connection. Stories helped people see themselves inside the message. Instead of hearing abstract advice, they could imagine real struggles, real growth, and real possibilities. This is the hidden power of storytelling. Stories make communication human. They create emotional bridges between people. A well-told story helps others feel understood because they recognize pieces of themselves inside it. Suddenly, communication no longer feels like instruction. It feels like shared experience. Strong storytelling also helps simplify complex ideas. Sometimes people struggle to understand abstract concepts until they hear them through an example. A story gives the mind something concrete to hold on to. It transforms information into something visual and memorable. This is why teachers, leaders, and speakers who use stories effectively often leave stronger impressions than those who only deliver facts. Another important part of storytelling is emotion. People rarely remember stories because of perfect wording alone. They remember how the story made them feel. Emotion creates memorability. That does not mean every story must be dramatic or emotional in an extreme way. Even humor, warmth, vulnerability, or honesty can create emotional connection. The key is authenticity. Forced storytelling feels unnatural. Real experiences told sincerely create far stronger impact. Good storytelling also requires simplicity. Many people ruin stories by adding too many unnecessary details. They lose the emotional point because they wander endlessly through information that does not matter. Strong communicators understand that the purpose of a story is not endless detail. The purpose is clarity, emotion, and connection. Every part of the story should move naturally toward the message underneath. Timing matters too. Stories become more powerful when they fit naturally into conversation instead of feeling rehearsed or forced. A simple story shared at the right moment often creates deeper impact than a long prepared speech. Strong storytellers pay attention to emotional flow and know when a story will strengthen communication rather than distract from it. You do not need extraordinary experiences to become a better storyteller. Everyday life already contains powerful stories. Conversations, failures, lessons, challenges, awkward moments, personal growth, and small victories all contain emotional meaning when communicated thoughtfully. What matters most is your ability to make the listener feel connected to the experience. The people who communicate most memorably are often not the people with the most information. They are the people who know how to make information feel alive. Stories create movement inside communication. They create emotion, relatability, and meaning. And once you learn how to tell stories people never forget, your words stop sounding temporary. They begin leaving lasting impressions in the minds of the people who hear them. Chapter 11. Speak with authority without sounding arrogant. Authority in communication is not created through loudness, dominance, or intimidation. Real authority feels calm, grounded, and self-controlled. It comes from clarity, emotional stability, confidence, and the ability to speak without constantly needing approval from others. Yet many people misunderstand this balance. Some become overly passive because they fear sounding arrogant. Others become forceful and aggressive because they confuse intensity with confidence. Strong communication exists somewhere in the middle. It is confident without being arrogant, direct without being disrespectful, and firm without becoming emotionally hostile. People naturally respond differently to someone who speaks with quiet certainty. You can often feel it immediately when someone trusts their own words. They do not rush. They do not constantly apologize for their opinions. They do not shrink themselves emotionally during conversations. At the same time, they are not trying to overpower everyone around them. Their communication feels steady because it comes from internal confidence rather than emotional insecurity. One reason many people struggle with authority is because they associate confidence with ego. They fear that speaking directly or confidently will make others dislike them, so they soften every statement, avoid eye contact, hesitate during conversations, and constantly second-guess themselves. Over time, this creates communication that feels uncertain even when the person is intelligent and capable. Meanwhile, other people overcompensate in the opposite direction. They become overly aggressive, interrupt constantly, and try to dominate conversations to prove their importance. But forced dominance rarely creates genuine respect. It usually creates tension. True authority is different. It does not need constant validation. It does not panic under disagreement. It remains calm even when challenged. People trust calm certainty far more than emotional intensity because calmness signals emotional control. Derek Lawson, an IT specialist in Houston, struggled with this balance throughout most of his career. Derek was highly skilled and knowledgeable, but during meetings he spoke so cautiously that people often overlooked his contributions. Whenever he shared ideas, he used uncertain language and ended sentences as if asking permission rather than expressing confidence. Co-workers interrupted him frequently because his communication lacked presence, even though his ideas were often correct. Over time, Derek became increasingly frustrated. Less experienced employees received more recognition simply because they communicated with more confidence. One afternoon during a project meeting, Derek presented a technical solution he had spent days preparing. But halfway through explaining it, another co-worker interrupted and confidently repeated a simplified version of the exact same idea. The room immediately responded positively to the other person. Derek sat there silently, realizing something painful. His problem was not intelligence. His problem was communication presence. After that experience, Derek began paying closer attention to how confident communicators carried themselves. He noticed they spoke more slowly. They maintained stronger eye contact. They did not constantly explain or defend every statement. Most importantly, they seemed emotionally comfortable with silence and disagreement. Derek slowly started changing his habits. He stopped filling every sentence with hesitation. He spoke more directly during meetings. Instead of shrinking when interrupted, he calmly continued his point without emotional reaction. The change was gradual, but people began responding differently almost immediately. Co-workers listened more carefully because his communication sounded more grounded. Managers took his opinions more seriously because he stopped presenting ideas apologetically. Derek discovered something important. Authority often comes less from status and more from the energy behind your communication. One of the strongest signs of quiet authority is emotional steadiness. Arrogant people often become defensive when challenged because their confidence depends heavily on external validation. But calm authority does not collapse under disagreement. Confident communicators can listen to opposing opinions without feeling personally threatened. They remain composed because they are secure enough not to treat every conversation like a battle for superiority. Body language also plays a major role in communication authority. Posture, eye contact, pacing and facial expression all shape how people experience your presence. Someone who avoids eye contact, rushes through sentences, or constantly fidgets may unintentionally communicate insecurity regardless of how intelligent they are. Calm physical presence strengthens verbal communication because confidence is communicated visually as much as verbally. Another important part of speaking with authority is learning to stop over-explaining yourself. Confident people trust that clear communication is enough. They do not desperately chase approval after every sentence. This does not mean becoming cold or emotionally disconnected. It simply means speaking with self-respect instead of insecurity. Listening also matters deeply here. Arrogant people dominate conversations because they constantly need attention and control. But people with real authority know how to listen calmly without losing presence. They do not interrupt unnecessarily because they are not emotionally desperate to prove themselves. This balance between confidence and humility creates trust. Strong communicators also understand that respect cannot be forced. Fear may control people temporarily, but genuine respect grows through consistency, emotional control, clarity, and integrity. People naturally trust communicators who remain calm, honest, and grounded over time. The goal is not to become intimidating. The goal is to become solid. When your communication no longer depends on approval, emotional reactions, or constant self-defense, your words begin carrying more weight naturally. People sense self-respect underneath calm communication. And when you learn how to speak with authority without sounding arrogant, your presence becomes stronger, not because you force attention, but because your communication quietly earns it. Chapter 12. Take control of difficult conversations. Difficult conversations reveal emotional maturity faster than almost anything else. It is easy to communicate well when people agree with you, support you, and make things comfortable. But the real test of communication begins when tension enters the room. Criticism, disappointment, confrontation, misunderstandings, unmet expectations, and uncomfortable truths are all part of life. The question is not whether difficult conversations will happen. The question is whether you know how to handle them without losing control of yourself. Many people avoid difficult conversations for as long as possible because discomfort makes them anxious. They stay silent when something needs to be addressed. They ignore problems hoping they will disappear on their own. They allow frustration to build quietly until emotions eventually explode in unhealthy ways. Others move in the opposite direction and become overly aggressive during conflict. They attack instead of communicate. They react emotionally instead of speaking clearly. In both cases, communication breaks down because emotion becomes stronger than intention. Strong communicators understand that avoiding difficult conversations usually creates larger problems later. Honest communication may feel uncomfortable in the moment, but avoidance slowly damages trust, relationships, teamwork, and self-respect. Mature communication requires the courage to address problems directly while still remaining calm and respectful. One reason difficult conversations become emotionally destructive is because people often enter them trying to win rather than trying to understand. The conversation becomes a battle for control, validation, or superiority instead of a search for clarity and resolution. Once ego takes over, listening disappears. People stop focusing on solutions and start focusing on defending themselves emotionally. Claire Whitman, a retail district manager in Phoenix, struggled with this challenge for years. Claire managed multiple store locations and supervised several employees, but she hated uncomfortable conversations. Whenever performance problems appeared, she delayed addressing them because she feared conflict and emotional tension. At first, this seemed easier, but over time, unresolved issues started damaging her team. Employees became confused about expectations because problems were never addressed clearly. Frustration quietly built beneath the surface. One employee in particular consistently missed deadlines and created problems for the rest of the team. Claire noticed the issue repeatedly, but avoided direct conversations because she worried about sounding harsh. Eventually, resentment spread throughout the staff because everyone knew the problem existed, yet nobody addressed it honestly. One afternoon, after another major mistake affected the entire team, Claire realized silence was no longer protecting harmony, it was creating dysfunction. Before meeting with the employee, Claire prepared differently than she normally would. Instead of entering the conversation emotionally frustrated, she focused on clarity and calmness. She decided the goal was not to attack the person or release frustration. The goal was to solve the problem honestly and respectfully. During the conversation, she spoke directly, without becoming emotional. She explained the issue clearly, listened carefully to the employee's perspective, and focused on solutions rather than blame. To Claire's surprise, the conversation did not create disaster or hostility. In fact, the employee admitted struggling with personal issues that had been affecting work performance for months. Because Claire remained calm and respectful, the conversation stayed productive instead of defensive. That experience changed the way she viewed difficult communication forever. She realized that avoiding hard conversations had actually been creating more harm than the conversations themselves. This is one of the most important truths about communication. Difficult conversations handled properly often strengthen relationships instead of damaging them. Honest communication creates clarity. Clarity creates trust. People may not always enjoy hearing difficult truths, but many relationships quietly suffer because important things remain unsaid. Another major key to handling difficult conversations is emotional regulation. The moment emotions completely take over, communication quality immediately declines. People say things they regret, exaggerate situations, interrupt constantly, or become defensive. Emotional intensity narrows thinking. Calmness expands it. This is why slowing down physically during conflict matters so much. Lowering your voice, slowing your breathing, and pausing before reacting all help maintain clarity under pressure. Timing also matters deeply. Difficult conversations handled during moments of extreme anger or emotional exhaustion often become destructive because neither person can think clearly. Strong communicators choose moments where calm discussion is more likely possible. They understand that emotional timing affects outcomes. Another important skill is learning how to separate behavior from identity. Immature communication attacks the person. Mature communication addresses the issue. Saying, "You're irresponsible," creates defensiveness immediately. Saying, "This situation created a problem we need to fix," keeps the focus on behavior rather than personal worth. This small shift changes the emotional direction of conversations dramatically. Listening remains critical during difficult conversations too. Many people become so focused on expressing their own frustration that they stop listening entirely. But productive conflict requires understanding both sides clearly. Listening does not mean automatically agreeing. It simply means allowing the other person space to express themselves without immediate attack or interruption. Strong communicators also understand that not every difficult conversation ends perfectly. Sometimes disagreements remain unresolved. Sometimes people react emotionally, despite your calmness. But emotional maturity means controlling your own communication regardless of how others behave. Your responsibility is not controlling another person's emotion. Your responsibility is communicating with clarity, honesty, and self-control. The people who communicate with the most strength are rarely the people who avoid difficult conversations completely. They are the people who can walk into discomfort calmly, without abandoning respect, honesty, or emotional discipline. And once you learn how to take control of difficult conversations instead of fearing them, your communication becomes far more powerful because you no longer depend on comfort to speak clearly and confidently. Chapter 13. Build the kind of presence people remember. Some people walk into a room and immediately leave an impression without trying too hard. They are not always the loudest, funniest, or most physically attractive people there. Yet others naturally pay attention when they speak. Conversations feel easier around them. Their energy feels calm, engaging, and memorable. This quality is often called charisma, but charisma is not magic. It is not something reserved only for celebrities, performers, or naturally outgoing personalities. Much of what people call charisma is actually communication presence. Presence is the emotional experience people have when interacting with you. It is created through attention, energy, confidence, emotional control, listening, eye contact, tone, and authenticity. Some people physically exist in conversations while mentally being somewhere else entirely. Others bring full attention into the moment, and people can feel the difference immediately. Presence makes conversations feel alive because the other person feels genuinely seen and emotionally engaged. One reason presence matters so much is because people remember feelings more than words. Years later, someone may not remember the exact details of a conversation, but they often remember how you made them feel. Did your energy feel calm or chaotic? Did you seem interested or distracted? Did people feel judged or accepted around you? Communication is emotional long before it becomes logical. Many people unknowingly weaken their presence because their attention is scattered constantly. They look around the room while someone is talking. They check their phones mid-conversation. They interrupt because their mind races ahead. They focus more on how they are being perceived than on truly connecting with the person in front of them. As a result, conversations feel shallow and forgettable. Adrian Mercer, a quiet bookstore employee in Portland, struggled with this throughout most of his 20s. Adrian admired people who seemed naturally magnetic in social situations. He noticed how certain individuals could make even ordinary conversations feel engaging and comfortable. Meanwhile, he often felt invisible during social interactions. He was not rude or unfriendly, but conversations around him rarely felt memorable. He spent so much time worrying about saying the right thing that he never fully relaxed into the interaction itself. One evening, Adrian attended a small gathering hosted by a coworker. During the event, he paid close attention to a guest who seemed unusually charismatic. What surprised Adrian most was that this person was not dominating conversations or constantly telling stories. Instead, he listened carefully, maintained calm eye contact, asked thoughtful questions, and reacted with genuine attention when others spoke. People naturally gravitated toward him because his presence made conversations feel comfortable and important. That observation changed Adrian's understanding of charisma completely. He realized presence was less about performance and more about connection. Instead of trying to impress people, he began focusing on being fully present during conversations. He stopped mentally rehearsing responses while others talked. He slowed down. He maintained better eye contact. He listened more carefully and responded more intentionally. Over time, people started reacting differently to him. Conversations felt smoother. Others opened up more naturally around him. Friends began inviting him into more social situations because his energy felt calm and easy to be around. Adrian discovered something powerful. Presence grows when attention becomes genuine. One of the strongest parts of memorable presence is emotional steadiness. People feel comfortable around those who remain grounded emotionally. Anxious energy often spreads quickly through conversations. So does frustration, insecurity, or emotional neediness. But calm people create emotional stability around them. Their communication feels easier because others do not feel pressure, tension, or judgment constantly radiating beneath the surface. Eye contact also plays a major role in presence. Strong eye contact signals attention, confidence, and respect. Avoiding eye contact too often can unintentionally create emotional distance because it signals discomfort or distraction. Of course, eye contact should feel natural rather than forced. The goal is connection, not intensity, but people can immediately feel when your attention is fully with them. Another important aspect of presence is learning to stop performing constantly. Many people become emotionally exhausted in conversations because they feel pressure to appear impressive, funny, smart, or entertaining at all times. But genuine presence usually feels relaxed rather than performative. People connect more deeply to authenticity than perfection. Calm confidence creates stronger attraction than constant performance ever could. Energy matters too. Presence is not only about words. It is also about the emotional atmosphere you bring into interactions. Warmth, attentiveness, patience, and emotional openness all shape how others experience you. Even simple habits like smiling naturally, speaking calmly, or listening without interruption create stronger presence over time. Strong communicators also understand the value of making others feel important. People enjoy being around those who make them feel comfortable expressing themselves. Presence grows when conversations stop revolving entirely around your own thoughts, problems, and need for validation. Attention becomes powerful when it feels sincere. The truth is, memorable presence is rarely built through flashy communication tricks. It grows through emotional maturity, self-control, attentiveness, and genuine connection. People remember those who make them feel seen, respected, and emotionally comfortable. And once you learn how to bring calm, grounded attention into conversations, your communication begins leaving deeper impressions naturally. Without forcing attention or chasing approval, you become the kind of person people genuinely remember long after the conversation ends. Chapter 14. Speak in a way that moves people. Information alone rarely changes lives. People hear advice every day. They hear instructions, warnings, facts, and opinions constantly, yet only certain words truly stay with them. Only certain conversations inspire action, restore hope, or create emotional impact strong enough to change behavior. The difference is not always intelligence or knowledge. The difference is emotional connection. Strong communicators do more than transfer information. They make people feel something. There is a major difference between speaking to inform and speaking to inspire. Informing gives people facts. Inspiring gives people energy, belief, clarity, and emotional movement. A person may understand exactly what they should do, yet still feel emotionally stuck. Inspiration helps bridge the gap between understanding and action. That is why communication becomes truly powerful when it reaches both the mind and the emotions at the same time. Many people struggle to inspire others because they communicate without emotional conviction. Their words may technically be correct, but there is no energy behind them, no warmth, no belief, no emotional presence. Communication feels flat because the speaker is disconnected from the deeper meaning behind their own message. People can feel this immediately. Energy transfers through communication more than many realize. This is especially important in leadership, teaching, parenting, coaching, friendships and relationships. People rarely remember every detail someone says, but they remember moments when words gave them courage, comfort, motivation, or perspective. Some conversations stay with people for years because they arrived at the right moment with the right emotional truth behind them. Savannah Brooks, a community college instructor in Minneapolis, discovered this lesson during a difficult period in her career. Savannah genuinely cared about her students and worked hard preparing lessons, but her classroom often felt emotionally disconnected. Students completed assignments mechanically, rarely participated deeply, and seemed uninterested during lectures. Savannah focused heavily on delivering accurate information, but something important was missing. One afternoon after class, a student stayed behind and admitted struggling with motivation and self-belief. Instead of giving another technical lecture or generic advice, Savannah spoke more personally than usual. She shared how uncertain and overwhelmed she had felt during her own early years trying to build a career. She spoke honestly about failure, fear and persistence. The student listened closely the entire time. The next week, Savannah noticed something surprising. More students began participating during discussions. Conversations felt more alive. Over time, she realized what had changed. She stopped speaking only from knowledge and started speaking from conviction and human experience. Her lessons became more emotionally engaging because students could feel sincerity behind the information. This reveals something important about inspiring communication. People connect deeply to authenticity. They are moved when words carry emotional honesty instead of empty performance. You do not need dramatic speeches to inspire others. Often, simple truth spoken with clarity and genuine belief creates the strongest impact. Another important part of inspiring communication is vision. Strong communicators help people see possibilities beyond their current limitations. They remind others of strength they may have forgotten in themselves. This does not mean unrealistic positivity or motivational cliches. Real inspiration feels grounded. It acknowledges difficulty honestly while still creating hope and direction. Tone matters deeply here too. Inspiring communication does not sound emotionally lifeless. It carries energy, warmth and conviction. This does not require loudness or dramatic delivery. Some of the most inspiring communicators speak calmly, but their words feel alive because belief exists underneath them. People trust conviction when it feels genuine. Storytelling also becomes especially powerful when inspiring others. Facts explain ideas, but stories create emotional understanding. A simple story about resilience, growth, courage, or perseverance often reaches people more deeply than direct advice ever could. Stories allow listeners to emotionally experience the message rather than merely hear it intellectually. Another key part of inspiring communication is encouragement. Many people silently carry self-doubt, fear, frustration, or emotional exhaustion. Sometimes one thoughtful conversation can shift someone's mindset more than you realize. Encouragement does not mean flattering people dishonestly. It means helping them recognize strengths, possibilities, or perspectives they may not currently see clearly themselves. Strong communicators also understand that inspiration requires belief in the message itself. People quickly sense when someone speaks mechanically without emotional connection, but when someone truly believes what they are saying, their communication naturally carries more emotional weight. Passion cannot always be manufactured artificially. Genuine conviction creates authenticity. At the same time, inspiring communication still requires clarity. Emotional energy without clear direction becomes empty motivation. Strong communicators combine emotional connection with meaningful substance. Their words inspire action because they create both feeling and understanding together. You never fully know how deeply your words may affect someone. A conversation you barely remember may stay in another person's mind for years. That is why communication should never be treated carelessly. Words can strengthen people or weaken them. They can create courage or fear. They can build emotional connection or emotional distance. The people who inspire others most are rarely those trying hardest to sound impressive. They are usually the people speaking with sincerity, emotional honesty, and genuine belief. Their communication feels human, grounded, and emotionally alive. And once you learn how to speak in a way that moves people instead of simply informing them, your words begin carrying a kind of emotional power that others remember long after the conversation is over. Chapter 15. Become someone worth listening to. Communication is not just a skill, it is a reflection of who you are becoming as a person. The way you speak reveals your emotional discipline, your confidence, your self-awareness, your patience, your insecurities, your maturity, and your ability to understand others. Over time, your communication becomes your reputation. People begin associating your name with a certain emotional experience. Some people leave conversations behind, and others feel drained. Some make people feel judged, ignored, or tense. Others create calmness, trust, clarity, and comfort simply through the way they communicate. This is why learning to speak better is ultimately about learning how to become better internally. Throughout this audiobook, you have seen that powerful communication is not built on manipulation, clever tricks, or complicated language. It is built on emotional control, clarity, confidence, listening, honesty, and presence. Truly smart communicators do not speak constantly just to prove themselves. They speak intentionally. They understand that words have emotional weight. They know that communication can either create connection or destroy it. And because of that awareness, they choose their words more carefully. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing communication only matters during important moments. They think communication matters only during interviews, presentations, business meetings, or serious conversations. But communication shapes your life every single day in smaller moments too. The tone you use with family members matters. The way you respond under stress matters. The way you handle disagreement matters. Even casual conversations slowly shape how people experience your character over time. Every interaction becomes part of the reputation you build. People quietly remember whether you listen or interrupt. They remember whether you stay calm or become reactive. They remember whether your communication feels respectful or emotionally exhausting. Long before people fully trust your intelligence, talent, or leadership, they usually decide whether they trust your communication. That is why communication mastery begins internally before it appears externally. You cannot consistently speak with calmness if your mind is constantly chaotic. You cannot communicate with confidence if you constantly seek approval from everyone around you. You cannot truly listen if your attention remains trapped inside your own ego and insecurity. The outer voice is deeply connected to the inner state. This is also why genuine communication growth takes time. You are not simply memorizing techniques. You are developing emotional habits. You are teaching yourself how to pause before reacting, how to stay calm under pressure, how to listen fully, how to speak clearly, and how to express yourself honestly without fear controlling your voice. These changes may seem small individually, but over time they completely transform the way people experience you. Strong communicators also understand the importance of consistency. A single powerful conversation may leave an impression, but consistent communication builds long-term trust. People trust those whose words, tone, and behavior remain emotionally stable over time. Consistency creates credibility because others begin feeling emotionally safe around you. They know what kind of energy you bring into conversations. Another important truth is that communication affects opportunities more than many people realize. Talent alone is often not enough. Intelligence alone is not enough. People who communicate clearly, confidently, and respectfully tend to build stronger relationships, stronger careers, and stronger influence over time because communication shapes human connection everywhere. Opportunities often grow through trust, and trust grows through communication. At the same time, becoming someone worth listening to is not about trying to dominate every room or impress every person you meet. In fact, some of the strongest communicators are remarkably simple in the way they speak. They are calm, they are thoughtful, they are emotionally present. Their words feel honest rather than performative. People trust them because they sense authenticity beneath the communication itself. This is why humility still matters deeply. Communication becomes dangerous when it turns into ego. The goal is not to become someone who always talks the most. The goal is to become someone whose words actually matter when they speak. Quiet confidence often creates more impact than endless noise. As you continue improving your communication, remember that progress does not happen perfectly. There will still be moments where emotions take over, conversations become awkward, or nervousness appears. That is part of being human. Growth comes from awareness and repetition. Every conversation becomes practice. Every interaction gives you another chance to become calmer, clearer, and more intentional with your words. The people who are truly worth listening to are not perfect speakers. They are emotionally grounded people whose communication reflects self-control, wisdom, empathy, and clarity. Their words carry weight because their character supports their communication. Over time, they become trusted not because they force attention, but because people feel better, calmer, and more understood around them. In the end, smarter speaking is about far more than sounding intelligent. It is about becoming the kind of person whose communication creates trust instead of confusion, calmness instead of tension, and connection instead of distance. And once your words begin reflecting emotional discipline, confidence, clarity, and genuine presence, people naturally begin listening differently, not because you demanded attention, but because your communication quietly earned it. Conclusion. Every word you speak is shaping the way people experience you. Long before people fully understand your abilities, achievements, or intelligence, they respond to your communication. They respond to your tone, your emotional control, your listening habits, your confidence, your clarity, and your presence. Communication quietly influences nearly every part of life. It affects your relationships, career opportunities, leadership, confidence, reputation, and the level of trust people place in you. That is why learning to speak better is never just about conversation itself. It is about learning how to carry yourself more intentionally in the world. Throughout this audiobook, you have learned that strong communication is not about using complicated vocabulary or trying to sound superior. Truly intelligent communication feels clear, calm, and grounded. It creates understanding instead of confusion. It creates connection instead of tension. And most importantly, it reflects emotional discipline rather than emotional chaos. You learned the importance of pausing before speaking instead of reacting impulsively. You learned how simplicity creates stronger communication than unnecessary complexity. You discovered how tone changes the emotional direction of conversations and why calmness often creates more authority than loudness. You learned that listening carefully is one of the deepest forms of respect a person can give. You saw how weak language quietly damages confidence and how over-explaining often reveals insecurity rather than strength. You also learned that communication becomes most powerful during difficult moments. Staying calm during conflict, handling uncomfortable conversations maturely, and speaking with steady confidence all separate emotionally disciplined communicators from emotionally reactive ones. You discovered the value of asking thoughtful questions, telling meaningful stories, and speaking in ways that emotionally move people instead of simply informing them. Perhaps most importantly, you learned that communication is deeply connected to self-awareness. The outer voice reflects the inner state. Nervous minds create nervous speech. Calm minds create calm communication. People who constantly seek approval often communicate with hesitation, while emotionally grounded people speak with greater clarity and self-respect. This is why communication mastery is ultimately personal growth in disguise. The good news is that communication is a skill that improves with practice. You do not need a perfect personality, natural charisma, or extraordinary talent to become a powerful communicator. You simply need awareness and consistency. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to practice emotional control, listening, clarity, confidence, and intentional speaking. Small improvements repeated daily eventually transform the way people experience you. Do not underestimate the long-term power of better communication. A single conversation can create opportunities that change your future. One calm response can save a relationship. One confident presentation can open career doors. One encouraging sentence can deeply affect another person's life. Words carry emotional weight whether people realize it or not, and over time your communication becomes part of your identity. At the same time, remember that the goal is not perfection. Even strong communicators still experience nervousness, misunderstandings, awkward moments, and emotional reactions sometimes. Growth does not mean becoming flawless. Growth means becoming more intentional, more aware, more emotionally disciplined, more capable of expressing yourself clearly, even under pressure. The people who communicate best are rarely trying hardest to impress others. They are usually calm, attentive, emotionally steady, and authentic. Their words feel trustworthy because their communication reflects inner confidence rather than performance. They do not force attention. They naturally earn it through clarity, presence, and emotional maturity. As you move forward from this audiobook, begin paying closer attention to your conversations. Notice your tone. Notice how often you interrupt. Notice when insecurity weakens your words or emotions take control of your reactions. Awareness is where transformation begins. Small changes in communication eventually create major changes in relationships, confidence, influence, and personal growth. In the end, smarter speaking is really about becoming someone people trust, respect, and remember. It is about learning how to communicate with calmness instead of chaos, clarity instead of confusion, and confidence instead of fear. Because when you finally learn how to control your words with intention, patience, and emotional discipline, you begin changing not only the way people hear you, but also the direction of your entire life.